Today, I will be doing a crossover with Seth of Locked On Wild as we discuss Kevin Fiala and some silly season discussion. There's a whole lot to talk about in today's episode, so buckle up.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Chalky, play-by-play announcer, and also Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, Trey Matthews. And like I said in yesterday's episode in which I did my interview with draft-eligible player Chase Cowrie, which, by the way, if you haven't checked it out, please pause this episode and give it a listen. The draft is fast approaching, so things are starting to heat up. I know I've already done a couple episodes on Kevin Fiala. However, I decided to do a crossover with Seth of Locked On Wild because he finally returned my calls, and I was like, look, I have a trade offer for you. I think it's something that you cannot refuse after talking with Jake Wakely, after talking with Jersey Joe, after talking with so many other Devils personalities about a hypothetical trade scenario for players like Kevin Fiala. I was just like, maybe it's time to do a crossover and do more discussion on it. So without further ado, let's talk to Seth of Locked On Wild. Take it away, my friend.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome to a special crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Devils, part of the Locked On Sports Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you for making both Locked On Wild and Locked On Devils your first listen each and every day of the week. And just as a reminder, both shows are free and they are available wherever you listen to your podcasts. On today's crossover episode, we take a look at what Kevin Fiala could do for the New Jersey Devils. We look at some potential picks and players that could come back to Minnesota in a trade. And the ever-important question, will the Devils be able to work a Fiala extension into their future plans? My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, joined by the host of Locked On Devils, Trey Matthews. And Trey, I'm theming all of these as what can Kevin Fiala do for you? And so I think we'll just start right there. Obviously, a premier piece that a lot of teams are interested in trying to acquire and add to their mix. So how do you envision Kevin Fiala fitting in with where the Devils are at currently and where they're trying to get to?
Well, one of my listeners actually brought up the fact that Kevin Fiala was able to basically work with what he was given in the Minnesota Wild. So they said Kevin Fiala was working on the bottom six, if I'm correct. He was on the third line.
Yeah, so that second and third line, they were kind of interchangeable, but at the beginning of the season, he was paired with the likes of Freddie Gaudreau as a wing, Nick Bjugstad, Victor Rask as the center. There were some interchangeable parts to that equation before Matt Boldy became the regular fixture on that line. But yeah, that line was treated more as a third line to start the season. And so I think working with what he is given as line mates, I think is a perfect way to describe how things went.
Yeah, so basically if we were to get Kevin Fiala, he would have a much bigger role with the Devils organization because basically here's what the Devils are trying to do this offseason. They're trying to make a splash signing, trade, whatever the case might be. And I actually have done a couple of episodes in regards to how do you take advantage of some of these teams that are kind of in a salary cap situation. Talked about obviously the Minnesota Wild, talked about the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I talked about a few other teams are kind of in the red when it comes to salary finance. So I know you don't want to get rid of Kevin Fiala. You know, I've seen your Twitter description basically saying that you're all for keeping Fiala. However, I think we all know the writings on the wall, which is Kevin Fiala basically has one foot out the door. I saw the Instagram post. I saw that he changed his profile picture of him from him wearing a Minnesota Wild uniform to now basically wearing just shoulder pads or something like that. So I think he knows that his time is pretty much up with the Minnesota Wild. And basically, if he were to be hypothetically dealt over to the New Jersey Devils, he would have a major role. He would play with on the same line as either Jack Hughes or Nico Hischier. Basically, Kevin Fiala would be that piece that the New Jersey Devils need, because one of the offseason needs I've been talking about for the Devils is that they need more forward depth. because outside of Jesper Bratt, outside of Jack Hughes, outside of Nico Hischier, the Devils weren't really getting that consistent offense. So, I'm banking on that maybe either Dawson Mercer, Andreas Janssen, Yegor Sharangovich. I'm banking on like one of those players to basically take their games to another level and basically, give us more point production. However, Tom Fitzgerald has said that the New Jersey Devils are going to be all in this offseason. They're going to explore all possible avenues to obtain a big name player, similar to what we did with Dougie Hamilton last year. So I think the overall role that I see Kevin Fiala fitting in is that he's the player that the New Jersey Devils are looking for in terms of, just getting that production. We've been linked to Johnny Hockey, Johnny Goodrow. We've been linked to a few other players. I know Michael of Locked On Leafs, he threw out a trade scenario for we would give up the second overall pick for William Nylander. Essentially, that's not the full deal, but he gave a blockbuster. That was basically the main focal point of the trade. So ultimately, if Kevin Fiala were to join the New Jersey Devils, he would have a much bigger role, and we would just be hoping that he's able to continue from what he was able to do this past season with the Minnesota Wild to now. And I've done a couple episodes covering him as well.
And for some of the Devils fans listening to this, wondering, you've got a guy that was over a point per game for a full season of production. Like, why are you deciding that he just doesn't fit into the long-term plans? And the counter to that is this is the byproduct of when you have to buy out the types of contracts that the Wild signed Zach Parise and Ryan Suter to. Not all of it was regarding on-ice production. With Zach Parise, you could make the case that he was not a productive player anymore. And so that ended up being the route that Bill Guerin went. But, with those guys, just things that were reported off the ice in the room, just not being great with those two, obviously it ended up being a move that had to happen. But this is the price a few years later that you pay for it. There were some salary savings in the near term with those buyouts, but now we're dealing with the ramifications of it. And all of the decisions made by Bill Guerin have led to this point, and the Wild just do not have enough money unless they go crazy and make some big trades. They just do not have enough money to fit Kevin Fiala into the long-term plans. And so now the question becomes, what sort of return can we get for a guy who is 25, coming off of a season in which he scored 85 points, and obviously could be a very, very appealing piece for a lot of teams throughout both the Eastern. Hopefully we don't trade him to the Western Conference, but there will be teams that will be interested. You'd have to be crazy to not be interested in that type of scoring throughout this league if you can find a way to pay him. So the Devils obviously have a lot of different pieces that they can work with as well. They've got draft picks and some young players as well. And so we're going to look at some of those different pieces that could be offered in return in a prospective Fiala trade. And we will do that when we come back here on today's crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Devils.
Don't worry, there's still more in store with Seth, but first I want to bring you guys the first and only live video this morning, and it comes from our friends at Built Bar. So from the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift for your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given Coconut Brownie Chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right, the Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a delicious, chewy, marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling and listen. They are good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and they are delicious. But listen up and listen to me good, because they are only here for a limited time flavor. So you have to go to Built.com right now to make sure you don't miss out. They are going fast because they taste amazing. All Built Bars are covered with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. The best part about Built Puffs is, of course, the amazing taste, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they are actually good for you. They are the perfect treat, perfect when you've got a craving, you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or if you need a quick, healthy snack, and they make an excellent source of protein. So delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing. Go to Built.com and order your your box of coconut brownie chunk bars right now. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Okay, now back to our discussion with Seth of Locked On Wild about Kevin Fiala. Take it away.
Continuing today's crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Devils. Once again, thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Make sure you're checking out the Locked On NHL podcast for your second listen to get the full lowdown on the Stanley Cup final, to see if Tampa Bay has found a little spark to get them back into the series. Locked On NHL is free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Trey, let's talk picks and prospects. Now, obviously, with the Devils having the number 2 overall pick, probably a little too tall of an ask for Bill Guerin in a Kevin Fiala trade, but with some players attached, second rounder could certainly be in play. So just take us through what's the rest of the draft capital looking like for the Devils for the 2022 NHL draft.
So I will say this. If the Devils had like the 5th overall pick, I think they would have no problem trading away to get Kevin Fiala. But they lucked out and got the 2nd overall pick. And like I've told you, that 2nd overall pick will be definitely a tall order. So I think originally the Devils were like, I don't know how true these rumors were or not, but I heard rumors saying that the New Jersey Devils would look to trade the 2nd overall pick for someone like Matthew Tkachuk. But let's face it, that's not going to happen. But, ultimately, that's sort of like the asking price, if that makes sense. And basically, it's just like, but Tom Fitzgerald has said that he was open to trading the 2nd overall pick for the right player. And I just don't think Kevin Fiala is that player you trade for the 2nd overall pick. Very good player, and I would love to have him on the roster, but he's just not worth the 2nd overall pick. But now here's the thing, and I've talked to a few other Devils news personalities about this matter as well. The Devils own their 1st round draft pick in next year's draft, so we could definitely use that as a factor. So, if you want a 1st round draft pick for Kevin Fiala, we could talk about next year's 1st round, just not this year's. But if you wanted a draft pick this year, maybe we would aim, like you said, 2nd round or a little later, because I think Devils fans, if it was like anywhere from like 5 to 10, if that 2nd overall pick was like 5 to 10, I think they would have no problem trading away for the services of Kevin Fiala. But the fact of the matter is that now, we have the chance to draft Logan Cooley or, maybe Simon Nesmith, or I think the favorite would have to be Juraj Slafkovsky. So ultimately, it's just like that 2nd overall pick more likely going to remain with our organization, but I'm sure Tom Fitzgerald will put out feelers. But we do have the draft picks this year. We do have that 1st round draft pick next year because, like I mentioned before, we do own it. So if you what kind of pick are you looking for? Like, are you looking for a 1st round pick, or are you looking for just a relatively early draft pick like the 2nd round, like you just mentioned? So I want to ask you that.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think there are 2 different ways that it can be answered. Obviously, if you look at this year's NHL draft and next year's NHL draft, next year's draft is supposed to be a very, very good one. So I think you're spot on with the 1st round pick this year. I think 2 is just too high for a player like Fiala. But yeah, 5 through 10, that probably would be more of a reasonable range to go. So 1st round pick next year is super appealing to try to stack a couple, because it's also, with Fiala being traded, it's going to be tough for the Wild to be as good next year as they were this year. Not saying it's impossible, but you got to find a way to replace 33 goals and 85 points in your offense, and that's not easy. So taking a couple of picks that could end up, depending on how the Devils do, being in the teens, and so you get a couple of 1st round picks in somewhere between 10 and 15. That's super appealing for me. Beyond that, I would say, if it's centered more around a pick, maybe a 2nd this year, a 3rd this year, something like that with a player attached. All of those 2, I'm way more interested in the 1st round pick next year.
Okay. So if we included the 1st round draft pick, I know this might be pushing it a little bit, but like I said, I've talked to other Devils news personalities. Would it be okay if it was a top 10 protected pick? If it was if the Devils don't have the best season next year, if we fall completely flat on our face and we don't improve, is it a little too greedy to say like, hey, we'll give you the first round draft pick, but it's a protected first round draft pick, But here's the thing. I'm banking on the New Jersey Devils improving their roster throughout the course of this offseason. So I'm banking on the fact that their season next year will be better than this past season. And like you said, next year's draft class is supposed to be way deeper because I hear rumors saying that outside of the top 5 draft picks in this year's NHL draft, this is not really a good, draft class. So which is why the New Jersey Devils are holding on to that second overall pick. But ultimately, if it was a top 10 protected first round draft pick, would you still accept it? Like, would that be okay?
Yeah, I think that definitely would be. Another way to look at it too is you are banking on the Devils being a playoff team next season.
Well, not playoff team, but just like that fringe. But before anyone comes at me, my ceiling for them. Fair. Wild card. That's my expectations. Wild card team, or just maybe that fringe dark horse team that maybe you don't fear necessarily, but you respect. Kind of thing.
Yeah, because I don't know if the language goes to lottery protected or something like that, or top 10. I'm fine with that because that's a stipulation you see quite a bit, and obviously if the Devils don't end up having the season you're hoping for, you want to be able to, you don't want to get burned and like end up getting the number 1 overall pick and then we have to give it to Minnesota.
Yeah, so my expectations for New Jersey Devils, if they're healthy this year, I think the COVID restrictions have definitely become way looser. I would say top 10 protected first round draft pick for you guys as a starting point, because I talked to another Devils podcaster about how would you go about it, and he said I think a lot of people would be willing to trade away the first round draft pick next year as long as it's protected. So my thing is I'm not a sidekick. I can't tell into the future or anything, but I expect anywhere from decent to big things for New Jersey Devils, especially if they're able to get that top player they're looking for, if they're able to fix their goaltending issues. So ultimately, that's my overall mentality for New Jersey Devils. So, you would still get a first round draft pick, but maybe it won't be relatively high, but still a first round draft pick, which is one of the reasons why I was considering that Nylander trade that Locked On Leafs offered me, because they also said, we'll give you our 25th overall pick in this year's draft. I said, while that's towards the end of the draft, it's still a first round draft pick. It's still something.
Yeah. And, I've looked at this potential trade a couple of different ways. Is obviously it's either pick centric or you're getting some younger players. Obviously the Wild roster and their salary cap situation, the roster is pretty much filled out for next season. So if it ends up being a young player that goes to Iowa for a season or two and then is ready to help, that's appealing as well. So for the Devils, any intriguing players that are maybe, on that, rookie or 1 or 2 years in, or anybody that has not quite hit the NHL level yet, that would be potentially appealing for Bill Guerin.
Okay, so basically I'm down to trade any prospect that is not named Luke Hughes or Alexander Holtz. But I think but my thing is if you want Alexander Holtz, because he was outplayed by Fabian Zetterlund. Personally, I don't think it was that big a deal. I just think it was a matter of circumstance. If you do want Alexander Holtz, I'm not giving you a first-round draft pick next year because I'm expecting big things from Alexander Holtz. So I've said this many times, the thing with prospects is just pick which one you want. But my thing is I'm not going to trade away Luke Hughes, and I'm not going to trade away Alexander Holtz most likely. And I think Pavel Zacha would be included in the deal as well. Zacha would just be a throw-in. We're just trying to get rid of him. He's a restricted free agent. If the New Jersey Devils do tender his contract, it's just because he's involved in some sort of deal kind of thing. So I would say like in terms of prospects, just pick whichever one you want. So I would have to look at someone like Fabian Zetterlund. He's a big guy on the forward. Riley Walsh led the Utica Comets defensive unit in assists. And then, you got AJ Greer. He was an MVP. I talked to a Comets writer, Chase DeLeo. He was able to have a big year last year while playing for Utica. So ultimately, it's my thing is like, just pick whichever prospect you want. I'm willing to part ways with any of them. But the couple prospects that are just on my like absolutely no touch list in terms of just not involving in a trade deal would have to be Luke Hughes, most likely Alexander Holtz, and also Dawson Mercer.
Yep, that was the name I was going to ask you about, because I have seen I've seen some people in Wild Twitter that have potentially been asking about Mercer services. But I look at it like this: with the way that this team is currently constructed, it may be a situation that Bill Guerin is just looking for a draft pick to allow Judd Brackett an opportunity to draft somebody into this system, let him marinate a little bit, and then help this team out once the buyouts are done, because Brackett's responsible for some extremely good picks for this team. Obviously, the Marco Rossi pick, Jesper Wallstad, look like some pretty solid additions to this Wild team. So I think it's either going to be that they go for a prospect who's maybe not quite ready for the NHL level, but is close, or a first-round pick. It's not going to be both. It's either going to be a first-round pick and maybe a low-level prospect, or a high-level prospect and maybe a draft pick. It's not going to be a first and a more prominent name, I don't think.
Yeah, so, but like I said, it's basically being in a candy store, essentially. Like,
yep.
Yeah, we could do so much because the Devils have the cap space, we have the prospects, we have the draft picks, which is why, I'm not just, talking just to talk. I'm saying I'm willing to put a deal together for any of these financial situations that some of these teams might be in. And I'm just like, okay, if you do this, if you do that, then we could definitely get a work done. But my overall thing for Kevin Fiala is he was able to have a good contract year. But my question for you is is he the real deal? Because my thing is the past couple seasons, he's put up solid production, nothing impressive, nothing to write home about, but he was able to show out in his contract year. And it's the same issue that I have with Jesper Bratt, who is, still a restricted free agent and still hasn't signed his extension with the New Jersey Devils. He had a really good year this past year, but the previous seasons, it's just solid, nothing spectacular. But, my overall thing is Kevin Fiala the real deal? Is he the big name piece that the New Jersey Devils are looking for, if that makes sense? Like you said, point per game player, able to tally 85 points in 82 games. But my thing is and I know I sound like a broken record, is is he set to be like this for years to come? Or were there other expectations for him? Because I'm not sure what you thought about him going into the season. Did you have those expectations? Did he meet your expectations? Did he exceed them? What was your mentality for Kevin Fiala?
Tell you what, let's dive into that here in just a second, because I have looked at some of the possibilities for Fiala's production as a whole. Some of that I think is the Matt Boldy effect, is having just that elite level winger on the line with him. So we will finish today's crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Devils talking about a little bit of Kevin Fiala and what to expect after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Devils. Seth Toupal and Trey Matthews talking about a potential Kevin Fiala trade. And Trey, we're going to talk about what to expect from Kevin Fiala, because you brought up an interesting question in just, is this a contract year for Fiala? Because you look at the last couple of seasons, and the 54 game season, he ended up, I think that was a couple years ago, he had 20 goals, 20 assists, so 40 points in 50. I think he played 51 games that year. He's been he's been between a 20 and 30 goal scorer when he, depending on how long the season is. This year obviously found a dream line pairing in Matt Boldy, who was able to was just fully ready to be kind of that complementary player to what Fiala looks to do. But some appealing things for Fiala in his career. He plays pretty much every day. The only thing that has kept Fiala out of the lineup over the last couple of seasons was he got it was a 3-game suspension against the Los Angeles Kings, like right away to start the season. Actually, I think that was last year. So ended up getting a 3 or 4 game suspension, played every other game. This year, played 82 games. And if you go back, has been, right around 80 to 82 games every season that he has played a full season. So no injury issues. He, this year, obviously didn't have the greatest of line mates to start the season. Freddie Gaudreau was playing wing, not center, and Victor Rask as your center and or Nick Bjugstad. It's not great. So it took him a little while to get his scoring going. When he is on, he is an elite level. When he is on a Fiala heater, he is an elite level scorer. He finished the season with 25 goals in his last, I believe it was 40 games. So just insane production when he is really feeling it. So some of that could have been the message from Bill Guerin to prove it this year, which he did. Some of that could have been just trying to meet that challenge. Some of it could have been Matt Boldy. But the other factor to take into consideration here, 25 years old, so just entering his prime. And so he very well just took another leap in his progression. A guy who's played in the NHL since he was 18. So are you going to get 85 points if you acquire Fiala? Depending on who his line mates are, you could get something very similar to that. You could get more. His production with Matt Boldy on the 47 games that they played together was a 44-goal, 108-point player in that pairing. So you get him a line mate that's similar, you could end up getting somebody that exceeds those numbers. It's all going to come down to the price of the extension. He wants to get paid, and he deserves to get paid.
He does. I mean, no ands, ifs, or buts about it. He did have a good contract year. Can't fault him for that. I just know, it's not going to come cheap. I know the Wild can't afford him. And I know that the New Jersey Devils, we have about $25 million in cap space. We're definitely going to have to use a decent chunk of that money to re-sign Jesper Bratt to his extension, because at the time of recording, an extension still has not been announced. I'm confident it'll get done, but still nothing right now. It seems like they're at a stall right now. But for Kevin Fiala, it's just like, because if we were to trade for his services, it's just like we're putting our trust into him that he's definitely going to try to continue the season that he had this past year. So my thing is just like, what are my realistic expectations for Kevin Fiala? Like I said, he could be paired alongside with Nico Hischier on the second line or Jack Hughes on the first line. I'm confident that someone like Jack Hughes could definitely get the same type of production out of Kevin Fiala, because you literally told him who his line mates were. And I think Jack Hughes is definitely very underrated in terms of being a very good facilitator in the league and just making teammates around him better. But ultimately, it's just like, I think it comes down to this. Like, I want Kevin Fiala, but what am I willing to give up? And like I told you, I'm willing to give up a first-round draft pick, not this year, next year, as long as it's protected. And I'll give you a prospect as long as it's not named Luke Hughes or Dawson Mercer or most likely Alexander Holtz, but that could be negotiable. And I would just throw in Pavel Zacha. I know you probably don't want Pavel Zacha, but we're just trying to get rid of him.
Yeah.
I've been patient with him. I was big on him last year, but he's kind of disappointed me.
Well, and that one's going to come entirely down to money because we definitely do not have a lot. And so if that's something that can be worked out to throw in as just one of those change of scenery pieces to this deal, that certainly is something that Bill Guerin would look at. Ultimately, I think from what you have said, I would lean more towards Kevin Fiala continuing the production hike with better line mates.
If he could give me anywhere from 70, or I'll be a little nicer. If he could give me anywhere from 65 to, let's say, 80 points, anywhere in that range, I think I'd be okay with it.
I think he can with a full season of some of those guys that you mentioned as his predominant line mates. I think he could definitely give you that.
Yeah, so because last year Jesper Bratt led our team in points in the 70 range. He had 26 goals along with Jack Hughes, which was tied for a team. So if Kevin Fiala were to have the same type of season that he had with the Minnesota Wild, so Kevin Fiala would be leading our team in goals, assists, and points. Like, no ands, ifs, or buts about it. So I know that I probably don't have the right to like nitpick his game or anything, but I'm just saying, like, if a first round draft pick is involved, if a prospect is involved, then I just gotta be careful, because I know the Devils are just trying to take their organization to the next level. But how we go about it is definitely going to be a factor, because if Tom Fitzgerald drops the puck on this one, then he might as well get a cardboard box and just pack the stuff in his office, because I know the New Jersey Devils were tired of just missing the playoffs like this. I think this is our fourth consecutive year of missing the playoffs. We've only been to the playoffs like once in the past like 11 or so years. Last time we were competitive was back in 2012 when we went to the Stanley Cup Finals. So ultimately, it's just like the Devils are just itching to get back to the playoffs, even if it's a wild card position, and even if we get knocked out of the first round, then that's still something. But like, how do we do this? We need decent goaltending. We need someone who could give us some stability in net alongside with Mackenzie Blackwood, or we need some solid defensemen. I think we've already worked on that with Dougie Hamilton. I'm banking on that. Dougie Hamilton will improve next year because he did have facial surgery. Ryan Graves, Jonas Siegenthaler, all those guys, they have silent impacts. I'm hoping the New Jersey Devils give PK Subban another shot just to join the organization once again. And then in terms of forwards, we just need more offensive production outside of our baby big three in Bratt, Hischier, and Hughes. And I think Kevin Fiala would definitely be a good gift for New Jersey Devils. And done a couple silly season discussions, and I just said not worth the second overall pick, but definitely someone I would try to pursue after.
Yeah, I think he could be a really good fit. The question, as we both have discussed, is just going to come down to the price and what does the extension that, because the team that acquires him is going to want him to sign an extension to stick around. Otherwise, there's no point in giving up prospects for that. So what does it take to get him? How much does it cost to sign him to a long-term deal? If the Devils can answer those questions, well, we may have ourselves a deal, and we'll be seeing Kevin Fiala rocking that Devils uni next season. So going to be fun to see how this plays out, and as we get closer to the draft, things will pick up. So we'll wait and see, but I think that's going to wrap up this crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Devils. So now that your first listen of the day is done, again, make sure you're checking out the Locked On NHL podcast to get the full lowdown on the Stanley Cup Final. The Locked On NHL podcast is free and available wherever you listen to your podcast, just like these two shows. Free and available wherever you listen. So make sure to check us out and stay up to date with your favorite NHL teams as part of the Locked On Sports Podcast Network. New episodes coming out every Monday through Friday.